HOA Karen wanted my farm gone for her dream resort. I'm the only one who can approve it. She came to my orchard with a smile, but her eyes told a darker story. She wanted every apple tree gone, every root ripped from the earth, all for her shiny new resort. The bulldozers were ready, the contracts signed, the neighbors silent. She thought she already won, but she didn't know the one thing that would destroy her dream. And when she finally found out, it was already too late. Welcome back to HOA Secrets Uncovered, the place where suburban power, greed, and petty revenge are brought into the light. My name is Daniel. I live in a quiet town just outside the city. By day, I work the soil of my family farm. By night, I sit on the county board that decides which dreams live and which ones die. And this is the story of how one woman's greed collided with my orchard and how her dream resort turned into her worst nightmare. OA. Karen wanted my farm gone for her dream resort. I'm the only one who can approve it, and this is the story of how her dream turned into her nightmare. I never thought my farm would become the center of a war, not a real war with guns or soldiers, but something quieter, colder, sharper, a war of papers, signatures, and power. Every morning I walk through my orchard, rows of apple trees stretching far beyond the eye, the smell of sweet fruit, the sound of birds. It's not just land to me, it's my life, my family's blood. Every tree was planted by my father, and his father before him, and I promised I would never let anyone take it away. But then she came, Karen, the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood. Her crown was her clipboard. Her throne was the HOA board. She had a smile sharp enough to cut glass, and she used it to hide something rotten underneath. The first time she mentioned her dream resort, I thought she was joking. A resort in our quiet T-town, surrounded by apple farms and barns and tractors. It sounded insane. But Karen was never joking. She was dead serious. She wanted my orchard gone, bulldozed flat, replaced with shiny hotels and fake fountains, something she called a vision of modern living. She came to my land one morning, high heels clicking against the gravel. Surveyors followed her like shadows. They pointed at my barn, at my apple stand, at my tractor shed. She spoke of progress, community development, future growth. Words that sounded sweet to everyone else, but to me, they were poison. I stayed quiet, because there was one thing she didn't know, one thing she could never guess. I wasn't just a farmer, I was also the man who sat on the county board, the only man with the power to approve building permits. But I didn't tell her that. Not yet, because sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. Days turned into weeks, and her campaign against me grew stronger. Letters began showing up, slipped under my door, pinned to my barn, even mailed with no return address. Your tractor violates noise ordinances. Your barn is 5 feet too tall. Your apple stand does not meet HOA standards. Each letter carried her perfume. Each letter was signed with her smug little initials, K.R. Karen Roberts, president of the HOA. At first I laughed. How could anyone take this seriously? But then, the fines started piling in. $100 here, $200 there. It didn't matter if the rules were made up. Karen made the rules, and she enjoyed watching me bleed under them. But fines weren't enough for her. She wanted me gone. One afternoon, I heard a low rumble outside my orchard. At first I thought it was thunder, but the sky was clear. When I stepped out, I froze. Bulldozers, 3 of them, parked at the edge of my farm, engines humming like hungry beasts, and Karen standing there with her arms crossed, a grin painted on her face. "This land will be better used for the community," she said. Her voice was sugar and venom all at once. "Your apples are nice, but they don't bring in tourists. She waved a hand toward the bulldozers. Resorts do. I didn't answer. I just stared at her. And the machines ready to tear apart generations of soil inside me. Anger burned hot, but outside. I stayed calm, because she still didn't know. She thought her dream was just one push of a button away, but her entire empire rested on a piece of paper. My paper. I turned back to my orchard, pretending to be helpless, pretending to be small. And Karen, she smiled wider, because she thought she had already won that night. I sat in my kitchen with the permit forms in front of me, blank pages, waiting for my signature, one stroke of a pen, and her resort would rise from the ground, one stroke of a pen, and my orchard would vanish forever. But she would never get that stroke, not from me. The next morning, I saw her again. She was walking through the orchard with contractors this time. They measured trees with tape, marked the soil with flags. She acted like she already owned the place, like I was just a stubborn farmer delaying her grand design. But I let her play her game, because the longer she believed she was winning, the sweeter her fall would be. Neighbors whispered about it too. Some thought Karen's resort would bring jobs. Some thought it would make property values go up. Some were too scared to say anything at all, but no one stood beside me. No one spoke against her. I was alone. At least that's what it felt like. But I wasn't weak. I wasn't helpless. Because I had the one thing Karen could never take from me, authority. I wondered how she would react. The moment she found out her entire dream was in my hands, would her smile crack? Would her voice tremble? Would she finally realize she was just a queen without a crown? And here's where I leave you with a question. If someone like Karen came to destroy something you loved, something your family built with sweat and years, would you stay silent? Play along? Let them believe they were winning, just to watch their face when the truth finally hit them? Karen thought she could take everything from me, but she didn't know the ground she walked on was mine in more ways than one. The town I live in looks quiet on the outside. Neat houses with trimmed lawns, flags on porches, neighbors waving from behind white fences. It looks like a picture in a postcard, but behind that picture is something else. Rules written by the HOA. Rules that choke the life out of people slowly. Here, you can get fined if your grass grows half an inch too tall. Here, you can be told what color to paint your door. Even the height of your mailbox has to be approved. It sounds ridiculous to anyone on the outside, but when you live here, you learn quick. You either obey or you suffer, and at the center of it all is her, Karen, the president of our HOA, the woman who never smiled without sharpening it first. She didn't just enforce the rules, she lived for them. Every fine, every warning letter. It was like fuel for her ego. And the neighbors? Most feared her, a few admired her, but no one dared to stand against her, except me, because while she was busy measuring lawns, I was busy tending to something older, stronger. My orchard. My apple farm wasn't just land, it was legacy. The trees planted by my grandfather still bore fruit every season. The barn built by my father still stood strong against storms, and the soil carried the sweat of generations when I walked those rows. I didn't just see trees, I saw my family's story written in roots and leaves, and Karen wanted to erase it all. For a resort, she called it progress. But I called it greed. She started slowly. First came the notes. You can't park your tractor in sight of the street. Your apple stand violates design guidelines. Then came the inspections. HOA members walking through my property with clipboards, as if they had the right, marking down every tiny detail, every chipped paint, every crack in wood. I knew who sent them. I knew whose perfume still lingered on the paper slips they carried, Karen. And yet, she never smiled wider than when she spoke about her dream. A resort with spas, pools, fountains that would spray into the sky. She talked like it was already there, like she could see it rising out of the soil, and in her vision there was no room for apple trees. One night, I overheard her in the town square. She was speaking to a group of neighbors, telling them how my orchard was wasted space, how her resort would bring wealth and visitors, and how everyone's property values would double. Her voice was honey, and most of them licked it up. But not me, because I knew what they didn't. Her entire dream, her entire empire, rested on one piece of paper. And that paper needed my signature still. I kept quiet, because watching her build her castle of lies only made me hungrier to knock it down. But she wasn't done playing her game. The letters grew harsher, the fines grew bigger, and one day I found something on my porch, a notice stating that if my barn wasn't brought up to standard in 30 days, the HOA had the right to take action. What did that mean? Tear it down? Seize it? The thought alone made my blood boil. I held the paper in my hand, crumpled it, threw it in the dirt, but deep down, I smiled too, because every move she made, every trick she played, was digging her deeper into the pit she didn't even see coming. A few days later, I saw her again, standing at the edge of my orchard, the golden light of evening hitting her face, contractors around her, pointing, planning. She looked at me like I was already defeated, her lips curled into that thin little smirk, the kind that says, "I've already won." But she hadn't, because the truth is, the moment she tried to bulldoze my orchard, she signed her own fate. Still, I wanted to see how far she would go. Would she push until the very last moment? Would she risk everything, not knowing the blade was hanging over her head? Sometimes it's not enough to stop someone. Sometimes you let them keep walking until they're standing at the edge of the cliff themselves. That night, I sat on my porch, looking out at the apple trees swaying in the breeze. The air was sweet with fruit, the same fruit Karen wanted ripped from the ground. I closed my eyes and remembered my father's words. Land outlasts people. Dreams built on greed will always fall. But roots survive. I didn't know if my orchard would survive her war, but I knew one thing. Karen was about to learn a lesson she would never forget, and so I kept my silence. I kept tending to my apples. I kept walking the rows of trees like nothing had changed, while the storm gathered closer and closer. But tell me this, if you had the power to end someone's greed with just one word, would you use it right away? Or would you wait and let them believe they were winning, just to watch their face when you took it all away? Karen's smile grew sharper every day. Like a blade that wanted to cut deeper into my life, it started small, with letters and fines. But soon, her war against me became something much louder, something I could no longer ignore. One morning I woke to the sound of banging. At first, I thought it was my barn door in the wind, but when I stepped outside, I froze. 2 men in bright vests stood by my fence, hammering a big orange sign into the soil, "Notice of violation." The letters screamed in red paint, "My orchard, my farm," was now officially out of compliance. I walked toward them slowly, the smell of diesel and sawdust filling the air. "Who sent you?" I asked. They didn't even look at me. They just nodded toward the street. And there she was, Karen, standing tall with her arms crossed, clipboard pressed against her chest like it was a weapon. Behind her, a line of neighbors stood on their porches, whispering, pointing, watching the show. Karen smiled at me, a smile without warmth. "This is your final warning," she said. "Remove the structures that violate our standards, or the HOA will take action." I looked at my barn, my apple stand, the very things that fed my family, and then I looked at her. Her heels dug into the gravel like she owned the ground, her eyes cold, her tone dripping with triumph. "Action?" I asked quietly. She leaned in just enough for me to hear, "We'll bring the bulldozers back." The words sank into me like ice, and the neighbors gasped as if they had just heard thunder. For a moment, I wanted to shout, to tell her right then that her entire dream was dust, that without my approval, her resort was nothing. But instead, I bit my tongue because silence was still my sharpest weapon. I stepped back, took a long breath, and said nothing. Karen tilted her head, confused, maybe even irritated. She expected me to fight, to argue, to beg, but I didn't give her the satisfaction, and that made her smile falter just a little. Later that week, the letters became worse, not just fines this time, but threats. Failure to comply will result in forced removal. Non-cooperation may lead to legal seizure. The words were heavy, ugly, meant to scare, and most people in this neighborhood would have folded under them, but not me, because while Karen sharpened her knives, I was already holding the axe she couldn't see, still. I wondered how far she was willing to go, how much she would risk before her empire collapsed in her own hands. The answer came sooner than I thought. It was Saturday morning. The sun rose warm, painting my orchard in gold, and then the rumble came again, low, deep, shaking the ground beneath my boots. Bulldozers, this time not parked at the edge, this time rolling forward, engines growling like monsters hungry for the first bite. I ran to the gate, and there she was again, Karen, in her spotless suit, her hair perfect, her smile painted like a mask. She lifted a hand and waved the machines on. "Wait!" I shouted, but she only looked at me like I was nothing. Her voice carried over the roar of engines. "This land will serve the community now." The bulldozer blade lowered. The ground shook, my orchard. The trees planted by my father's hands trembled in the path of steel. Neighbors stood along the street. Some clapped, some gasped. Most stayed silent. Because in this neighborhood, silence was survival. My blood boiled, my fists clenched. But still, I stayed calm on the outside. Because if I broke my silence now, I would ruin everything. The bulldozer stopped just inches from the first tree. Karen raised her hand again. The driver looked at her, waiting, ready. And in that moment, the only thing that stood between the machines and my orchard was me. I stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and stood in front of the tree. Karen's smile cracked just a little, the neighbors murmured, and the bulldozer's engine sputtered as the driver hesitated. Karen barked, "Move out of the way!" Her voice wasn't sweet anymore. It was sharp, desperate, trembling just enough to show the crack in her crown. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stared at her, letting silence do the work. My words never could. Finally, she lowered her hand. The bulldozer stopped. The engines died down, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes, because she realized something she didn't want to admit. She had power on paper, but I had power she couldn't touch. When she stormed off that day, heels striking the gravel harder than ever, I knew the battle had only just begun. But here's what I want to ask you. If bulldozers came to your doorstep, ready to erase everything your family built, would you stand in front of them like I did? Or would you let them roll forward and fight a different way? Karen's heels clicked against the pavement as she stormed away that day. But her silence was louder than any words she could have spoken. I thought maybe she would stop after the bulldozers backed down. Maybe she would realize her empire wasn't as strong as she believed. But I was wrong, because the very next week, she came back with a new plan, a plan louder, bigger, more dangerous. It started with the neighbors. I noticed them one by one, turning cold. People who used to wave when I walked down the street. People who once bought my apples and laughed at my jokes, now looked at me with suspicion in their eyes. Whispers spread like wildfire. He's holding the community back. He's selfish. He doesn't care about progress. I knew who started those whispers, Karen. She didn't just want my land. She wanted to isolate me, to make me the villain in my own town. Then came the contractors. Big trucks rolled into the street, men with blueprints tucked under their arms. They walked the edges of my orchard like vultures circling prey, measuring, pointing, nodding at Karen like loyal soldiers. One of them even had the nerve to step into my orchard without asking. He planted a little red flag in the soil, right between two apple trees. When I pulled it out and tossed it to the ground, he muttered under his breath, "You'll lose anyway." Karen stood nearby, her arms crossed, her smile sharp. "You can fight me if you want," she said softly, "but progress can't be stopped." Her words stung, but they also made me want to laugh, because while she believed she was unstoppable, her entire plan still rested on a paper sitting quietly in my desk drawer, a paper without my signature. Still, she didn't slow down. She called emergency HOA meetings. She passed out glossy pamphlets showing what the resort would look like: pools, fountains, neon lights glowing against the night sky. She promised jobs, wealth, recognition. And every time she spoke, she made sure to remind the crowd that I was the one standing in the way. Neighbors avoided my eyes after that. At the grocery store, at the gas station, even at church, they whispered behind my back. And when Karen walked in, heads nodded in approval. It was like watching a queen command her court. And I was the traitor they were told to hate, but I didn't bend, I didn't speak, because the more she built her tower of lies, the harder it would crash when the truth finally hit her. One evening, I found another notice pinned to my barn. This one wasn't like the others. It was stamped with bold red letters, "Final Demand." It claimed my orchard was in severe violation of multiple HOA codes, that if I didn't vacate or comply within 10 days, the HOA would take control of the property. My blood boiled. My hands shook as I read the words. But deep down, I smiled too, because more desperate she became. The closer she came to her own ruin, the following Saturday, Karen brought her full army. She arrived with contractors, architects, even a man in a suit who claimed to be an investor. They set up tables at the edge of my orchard, rolled out giant blueprints across them. I watched from my porch as they drew lines across my land, as if my farm was nothing but empty paper waiting to be filled. Karen pointed at my barn, my apple stand, my trees, and laughed with them as if my life was just an obstacle in her game. Neighbors gathered around too. Some clapped, some cheered, some just stood there with wide eyes. And for the first time, I felt the weight of being alone, truly alone, an army against one man. But I didn't move, I didn't speak, I just watched, because silence still belonged to me. And then she walked over. Karen's heels dug into the soil like daggers. She stopped a few feet away from me, her voice sweet, almost gentle. "You could be part of this, Daniel. You could sell the orchard, take the money, start fresh somewhere else." I looked at her painted smile, and I thought of my father's words again. Land outlasts people. So I shook my head slowly, and her smile cracked. That's when she leaned closer, her voice no longer sweet, her tone sharp enough to cut. "If you don't get out of my way, I'll bury you with your orchard." She turned and walked back to her investors, but I stayed there on the porch, my hands clenched against the railing, my heart pounding with fury. Because this wasn't just about apples anymore. This was war, and war has only two outcomes. One side wins, the other side falls. The night was quiet after they left, but my mind was not. I knew the storm was building, and I wondered, when the truth finally hit her, when she realized the power she never saw in me, would it break her, or would it make her even more dangerous? And here's where I leave it with you. If you were me, surrounded by neighbors turning against you, fines piling up, threats coming daily, would you reveal your hidden power right then and end it all? Or would you let your enemy keep building their castle higher, just to watch it crumble harder when the ground gives way? They say silence is weakness, but they don't know the kind of silence I carried. It wasn't fear. It wasn't surrender. It was a blade I kept hidden in the dark, waiting for the right moment to strike. Karen, though, she thought she had me cornered by the 5th week. The neighborhood didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like hers. Flags for the future resort project decorated lawns. Pamphlets with glossy pools and smiling faces slid into every mailbox. And neighbors who once bought pies from me now bought her dream instead. At HOA meetings, she didn't even look at me anymore. She stood at the front, glowing like a queen under stage lights. The board nodded, the crowd clapped, the contractors grinned, and my chair in the back might as well have been empty. One evening as I walked home, I heard laughter from across the street. 3 neighbors stood together, pointing at my orchard. "Dead land," one of them said. "Better for condos than apples." I gritted my teeth. But I didn't stop walking because the time wasn't right. Not yet. The real blow came on a Thursday morning. I stepped outside and found my apple stand smashed to pieces, wood splintered, glass shattered, baskets of apples scattered across the dirt. A crude spray-painted message on the barn behind it read, "Sell and leave." My fists clenched. The taste of iron filled my mouth as I bit my tongue to keep from roaring. I looked across the street. Karen stood there, arms folded, her lips curled in a smug smile. She didn't hold the spray can, she didn't swing the hammer, but she might as well have signed her name on the wreckage. That was the first time I felt the silence inside me begin to crack. Later that night, she knocked on my door, not with rage, but with something worse, with calmness. She held a manila envelope in her hand, and without waiting for me to invite her, she stepped inside. "Daniel," she said smoothly, laying the envelope on the table, "you've resisted long enough, but the papers are ready. The resort is moving forward with or without you. If you sign now, you'll walk away with money in your pocket. If you don't, well," her eyes flicked to the broken stand outside the window, "you've already seen how the neighborhood feels." I stared at the envelope, at the fresh stack of legal pages she had drawn up. Her pen lay neatly on top of it, waiting for my hand. She leaned closer. Her perfume was sharp, suffocating, her voice low. "This land isn't yours anymore. It's mine. Everyone knows it. You're just too stubborn to admit it." I didn't touch the papers. I didn't touch the pen. Instead, I looked her dead in the eyes and finally spoke words she never expected. "You think you've already won, Karen, but you've been playing checkers on a chessboard." Her smirk faltered, just slightly, but I saw it. I saw the hairline crack in her armor. "You'll regret this," she snapped. Grabbing the papers back, she stormed out, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. But her silence afterward told me everything. For the first time, she wasn't completely sure of herself anymore. That night, I walked through my orchard under the silver wash of moonlight. I touched the bark of each tree, felt the roughness beneath my palm. This wasn't just soil and wood. This was history. This was blood. This was mine. And Karen. Karen had no idea that she wasn't just fighting a man. She was fighting roots older than her HOA, older than her dreams, older than her empire of glass and steel. The storm came 3 days later. Karen held a grand event on the edge of my orchard, banners, tents, even a little stage. Investors in sharp suits mingled with neighbors holding plastic cups of free wine. The contractors unveiled a giant model of the future resort, a shining palace of lights where my orchard now stood. The crowd gasped, clapped, cheered, and then Karen stepped up to the microphone. "Friends," she began, her voice syrupy sweet. "Today marks the beginning of a new era for our community. No longer will we be held back by the past. The orchard has had its time, but now we move into the future." The crowd erupted, cheering, whistling, clapping, and then she pointed at me, her smile cruel, her voice loud enough to cut through the noise. "There he is, the man who refuses to move forward, the man who wants to hold us all back. Look at him, staring at the future like he's afraid of it." Dozens of eyes turned toward me, some filled with anger, some with pity, and for the first time, I didn't stay silent. I stepped forward. The crowd hushed. "You call this the future?" I said, my voice steady. "This resort, these lights, these empty promises? You think tearing down history makes you strong?" Karen's smirk widened. "Oh, please, Daniel, spare us the speech. Nobody wants your trees, nobody wants your apples. You're nothing but a relic, and relics don't belong in the future." I let her words hang in the air. Then I leaned closer to the microphone and whispered just loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Funny thing about relics, Karen. They tend to outlast the people who try to bury them." A ripple went through the crowd. Some laughed nervously, some gasped. Karen's face flushed with anger, and in that moment, I saw fear in her eyes for the very first time. She tried to cover it with a laugh, with another wave of her hand. But she knew, knew the silence she mocked was no longer silence at all. It was a storm, and it was coming for her, the night after Karen's big event. I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, the broken apple stand still fresh in my mind, her voice still echoing in my ears. Relic. That's what she called me. A relic to be forgotten, buried, erased. But she didn't know. Relics hold power, and mine wasn't just personal. It was official. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out a folder most people didn't even know existed. Inside were stamped documents, codes, county maps, and legal lines that only one kind of person could understand. Someone like me, the man who sat on the county board that decides which projects get approved and which ones die. Karen had bought her banners, she had bought her investors, she had even bought the hearts of some of my neighbors. But there was one thing she couldn't buy: the paper that needed my signature. Without it, her dream resort was nothing more than a pile of plastic models and lies on glossy brochures. Still, I didn't move too quickly. I didn't wave my power like a weapon, because real power isn't loud. It's quiet. It waits, it watches, and then it strikes where it hurts most. The first thing I did was simple. I walked through town, calm, silent, as if nothing had changed. Neighbors whispered behind my back. Some laughed when they saw me, pointing at my worn boots and orchard-stained hands. Karen had made me the fool in their eyes, but I smiled anyway, because fools don't scare people. Fools are ignored, and being ignored gave me room to move in the shadows. That same afternoon, I visited the county office. I didn't announce myself, I didn't bring noise. I just slid the resort application back across the desk and marked it incomplete. Missing environmental reviews, missing traffic studies, missing water usage reports. Karen thought she had rushed it through, but I had the power to send it right back, and I did. When Karen found out, she stormed into my orchard in a rage. Her heels dug into the dirt like claws, her voice shaking with fury. "What did you do, Daniel? Why isn't the application moving forward?" I leaned against the barn door, arms crossed, and simply said, "Paperwork takes time. You should know that." Her face turned red, her hands trembling with rage, but she couldn't say what she wanted to, because deep down she knew I wasn't lying. From that day, Karen started unraveling. She knocked on doors late at night, begging neighbors to pressure me. She sent me letters, each one nastier than the last. She even tried to bribe a county worker to slip her project past my desk. But every time she moved, I moved quieter. Every time she struck, I struck deeper. I filed a noise complaint about her community rally. I flagged her project for an environmental inspection. I requested water reports that would take months to complete. And all the while, I never raised my voice, never lost my calm, because silence was the sharpest weapon I had. The investors began to waver, the contractors began to stall, and whispers turned against her. One night, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee. The air was cool, the orchard alive with the smell of apples. And across the street, I saw her pacing back and forth inside her house, shadows moving fast behind the curtains. She wasn't the queen anymore. She was a desperate player watching her board crumble piece by piece. But Karen was dangerous when desperate, and I knew she wouldn't stop. She would strike harder, maybe even lower, and she did. The following week, I woke to find county inspectors on my land, not one, not two, but 5 of them. They walked through my orchard, poking at the soil, scribbling notes on their clipboards. When I asked what was going on, one of them muttered, "Anonymous complaint, safety hazards, possible zoning violations." Anonymous. But I didn't need a name. I already knew. Karen had tried to turn my own silence against me, but she forgot one thing. When you invite the law to dance, it doesn't always choose the partner you want. Because here's the truth. Karen never understood. This land had been in my family for 3 generations. Every line of paperwork, every zoning code, every tax record was in perfect order. The inspectors found nothing, not one violation, not one mistake, and when they left, I made sure to thank them kindly. Karen's plan had backfired, and worse for her. It left a trail of complaints that I could now trace back to her. I wasn't just the quiet man with an orchard anymore. I was the man who knew exactly how she was breaking the rules, and I was ready to use it. That night, as the wind rustled through the apple trees, I stood in the middle of my orchard and finally felt it. The silence inside me wasn't a burden anymore. It was a storm gathering strength with every passing day. And when it broke, it would wash Karen's empire away. The only question was, how far was I willing to go to end her game once and for all? The night the storm finally broke, the air felt different. Heavy, charged, like the sky itself was waiting for something to fall. Karen thought she had weathered my silence. She thought she had beaten me with her rallies, her banners, her endless speeches. But what she didn't know was this. I wasn't silent because I was afraid. I was silent because I was listening. And I had heard everything I needed to destroy her. The investors had started calling me in secret. At first, just whispers on the phone, questions about permits, about delays. Us about missing documents, I answered calmly, truthfully. And the truth was sharper than any lie Karen could sell. Her project wasn't moving. Her numbers didn't add up. Her resort was built on promises she could never keep. Then the county review hit her like lightning. The water report came back. Her resort would drain the local wells dry within 2 years. The environmental study returned. Her future paradise would tear down protected trees and harm wildlife, and the traffic inspection sealed it. Her dream would choke the roads, cripple the town, and drown the community in noise, one by one. Her shiny papers crumbled into dust, stamped with bold red letters that said exactly what I wanted to hear. Denied, the day she got the news. I was in my orchard, the sun high, the apples heavy on the branches. Karen stormed across the road, papers clutched in her trembling hands. Her hair was wild, her eyes blazing with panic. "You did this!" she screamed, shoving the stamped pages against my chest. "You ruined everything, everything!" I looked down at the papers, at the word denied printed over and over again, and I almost smiled. "No, Karen," I said quietly. "I didn't ruin anything. You did. You forgot the rules, and I never forget the rules." Her face twisted. She wanted to scream again, to spit venom, to tear me down with words. But behind her rage, there was something else. Fear. She wasn't the queen anymore. She wasn't even the fighter anymore. She was just another neighbor, standing in my orchard, powerless. The investors pulled out within days. The contractors packed up their models and their trucks, and the neighbors who once cheered her on stopped returning her calls. The resort was dead. But Karen wasn't done. She clung to whatever scraps of power she had left. She filed complaints against me. She tried to fine me for orchard debris. She even spread rumors that my apples were poisoned, each move more desperate than the last, each strike weaker than the one before. And I didn't lift a finger to fight her, because she wasn't fighting me anymore. She was fighting herself, and she was losing. The final blow came not from me, but from the HOA itself. One evening, I walked past the clubhouse and heard shouting inside, Karen's voice, shrill, desperate, and the voices of the board, tired, angry, fed up. When the doors opened, she stormed out, tears in her eyes, a letter clutched in her fist. She had been voted out as HOA president. The same neighbors she had bullied, bribed, and manipulated had finally turned on her. She disappeared from the neighborhood after that. Her house sat dark, the lawn uncut, the mailbox overflowing. Some said she moved away, some said she broke down, others said she still lives there, behind closed blinds, too ashamed to show her face. But me, I don't think about her much anymore. I walk my orchard every morning, the sun rising through the branches, the apples shining like fire in the light, and I know this land is safe, because the roots run deeper than greed, deeper than power, deeper than Karen ever understood. Sometimes I wonder what she thinks when she looks across the road. Does she still dream of her resort? Does she still curse my name? Or does she finally understand that silence was never weakness? It was patience. And patience always wins. The orchard still stands, and so do I. Now let me leave you with this. If you were in my shoes, standing against someone who tried to bulldoze your life for their dream, would you destroy them slowly, letting their own greed eat them alive? Or would you deliver one crushing blow, ending it all at once? Which revenge would you choose?